Hey there, welcome to the DFS build. We're getting ready for the Week 7 main slate at DraftKings. I'm Kevin Roberts, joined with Taylor Smith. We are going to break down each position and hopefully point you to some good plays. We're going to go over our favorite plays. We're going to look at matchups, projections, ownership, and all that stuff, and hopefully help you out. So the way we're going to do it is we're going to look at the top 5 players at each position coming in as far as raw points, fantasy projection. And then we're going to look at the 5 most owned players at each position, and then also look at some value too to hopefully help you out. If we do help you out, give this video a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. All right, Taylor, let's get into it. At quarterback, Jaden Daniels leads the way, coming in with a 24-point fantasy projection. That makes a lot of sense because he's facing the Panthers. And right behind them to round up the top 5 are Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Jordan Love, and Sam Darnold. All of those guys, except for Darnold, are coming in with over 20 fantasy points for the projection. Of that 5-pack, who stands out the most for you?
So we have like these 3 games on the slate. There's Minnesota, Detroit, there's Atlanta, Seattle, and there's Washington, Carolina. These have super high totals. 2 of them are indoors. The other is Washington against Carolina. They have a super high total. I think they're pretty heavy favorites. I think really anything you do that's not building around those 3 games is going to be different enough on this slate. So it's scary to fade them. And I'm not saying to fade those quarterbacks in those games. Jaden Daniels obviously leading the way. As of now, I'm kind of taking a pretty firm stance against him and against Jalen Hurts to a lesser extent. Like, I think he's okay, but not super exciting to me on this slate in this matchup. Of the high-end quarterbacks, I'm kind of going off the board with CJ Stroud and Jordan Love. I think that game is the one that has a pretty high total. It's like 47.5. We talked earlier in the week about how it seems weirdly low. These are 2 elite offenses. The weather should be fine up there. I think that game is the one that I'll be targeting most heavily compared to the field. So Stroud among the high-end QBs is the one that I'm kind of building around the most.
Yeah, what's his ownership at right now? Wow, his projection feels low. Yeah. I like that call a lot. And Love isn't carrying ownership either. He's actually $200 cheaper. So, okay, Jaden Daniels is the best play in a vacuum because he's playing the Panthers. He's got the dual threat upside. And he's had like 20 plus fantasy points in every game but one on the year. He's just super safe and he has that nice ceiling. So I'm not going to tell anybody not to play Jaden Daniels. I love Jaden Daniels. The only problem is he's 7.6K and he's going to be 10% owned, like chalky, expensive Jaden Daniels. So I'm in agreement with you. I think I'm going to go away from him a little bit. I'm kind of like right there with you. I prefer Love over Stroud. The Texans so far are giving up the 3rd most passing touchdowns on the year, 12 touchdowns through 6 games for them. It just feels like they are the better matchup by a hair. And obviously they're, the Houston's on the road and Green Bay in this game as well. So I don't think you can go wrong. CJ Stroud also looks good. Jordan Love just projects better. Neither of them are going to be owned though. So that is very interesting to note. Speaking of ownership, let's just go and kick it over and look at the highest owned guys and kind of reflect on what we feel about those guys. Jaden Daniels is in their 2nd highest owned. The top guy in terms of ownership at quarterback is going to be Sam Darnold. That has a lot to do with the fact that he's only 6.2K, and he's also facing a pass funnel Detroit Lions defense, although that didn't really work out for Dak Prescott last week, right? Rounding out the top 5.
Did not.
Rounding out the top 5. Oh, I'm aware. Daniel Jones, Anthony Richardson, and Geno Smith. Those are the guys rounding out the top 5 as far as ownership. I mean, I can just tell you right now, I don't want to play Anthony Richardson on his first game back against Miami. It's not like Miami is like a very tough matchup, but I don't know. Maybe it's a good spot to play Richardson, but if he's chalky, I'm not feeling it. Of these other guys, I actually like Daniel Jones a good amount. Eagles are a good matchup for quarterbacks. He's only 5.4K. Nice stacking option with neighbors. The downside for all these guys is they're owned. So who are you playing here?
I don't really think Richardson will be owned. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. From what I'm looking at, like the Blitz projections, they have him at 1.45% ownership. I don't know if I need to reload that, but I kind of like him at 6K flat if he's in. Just the rushing upside alone makes him interesting among these kind of secondary cheaper QBs. The matchup's not phenomenal, but they are at home in the dome. Among those kind of cheap-ish QBs, I think he's pretty interesting.
Am I reading this right? Is Miami the number one defense against quarterbacks on the year?
I have no idea. I don't.
I mean, that's what I'm seeing. Really. That's gross. Maybe I'm wondering if it's like, kind of coming based off of matchups or something. Like they just faced a lot of bad quarterbacks, possibly.
I know they faced Jacoby Brissett already, and they faced. Yeah. Didn't they face Will Levis?
Yeah. So that, like I said, this. Well, by the way, Anthony Richardson isn't very good.
But he can run. Like Jacoby Brissett and Will Levis aren't running. They faced Jacksonville,
Levis can run a little bit. Hey, they've only given up 10 rush attempts for 21 yards to quarterbacks and no rushing touchdowns.
Levis also left that game injured early, so it was like Mason Rudolph for the most part.
Yeah, you're right about that. Okay, this is where I'm at with Anthony Richardson. If he's going to be remotely chalky, I'm out because there's a lot of red flags about Richardson. He's not accurate. He's coming off of an injury. He's injury prone. He could just get hurt again, a new injury perhaps. And this matchup apparently looks horrible. So if Anthony Richardson is going to be chalky, I will gladly go do something else. But if that changes and we update closer to Sunday and he's going to be overlooked, obviously, like you said, the rushing upside he provides does make him interesting. Anybody else here that stands out? Are you going to go play very owned Sam Darnold? Do you like Danny Dimes at all?
I do like Danny Dimes quite a bit. It's because he's cheap and you play him with neighbors, and that's really all you have to do. Right. I'm not going to go into like Wandale and other guys in the stack. I think it's just the skinny stack with those two looks really good to me. Stroud, I mentioned. The guy I haven't mentioned, who is my highest owned QB on the slate, is Brock Purdy at 6'4". I feel like
Kansas you want to play Brock Purdy every week.
I know, I do. He's cheap. He always has good props. He's got great weapons. Like
you weren't wrong about him last week. 24 fantasy points.
Hey, yeah. Well, that was I think Thursday night, but
still.
Yeah, like I just don't really see any reason not to get there. That's another game that should kind of fly under the radar, I think, from a fantasy standpoint. Decently high total. He's not phenomenal, but he can run a little bit, and the weapons you pair him with are pretty easy. The thing I like about Stroud, going back to that real quick, is without Nico Collins, like we know where the ball's going. We know it's going to Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell. He's not really going to throw much to, Dalton Schultz or those secondary receivers. So you're just kind of playing those three together, and it kind of builds itself very easily. The issue with Love is that you got Dobbs, you got Watson, you got Reed, you got the tight ends to consider, Tucker Kraft primarily. So it's a little murkier. I do like the Love call, though, and I will be getting to both.
Yeah.
I
think quarterback is kind of interesting for me this week. I think it's going to be a very tight player pool for me. I do still think I'll eat some of the Jaden Daniels chalk. I think if you compare Jaden Daniels to the other expensive stud quarterbacks like Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, I don't like their matchups. I mean, at all compared to his matchup. And he's not that much more expensive. And like the ceiling and floor is the same or better. So give me Jaden Daniels over Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts. Ownership be damned all day. I really am not interested in those guys at all. It's either paying all the way up for Jaden Daniels. I'm coming a little bit down to CJ, a little bit further down to Jordan Love, or I'm punting with Daniel Jones. I think that's where I'm at quarterback this week. I'm not to ignore Sam Darnold because he is a good play in theory, but like we talked about in our betting show, which you can find at the end of this video, by the way, the Lions aren't an easy matchup. They are a pass funnel defense, but that doesn't necessarily equate to production, as we've learned.
I think we shouldn't overlook the QBs in the Seattle-Atlanta game. It looks like they're going to be somewhat popular, Cousins and Geno. I think I'll be under the field on both. Neither offers rushing upside, particularly Kirk Cousins, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, he spreads the ball around. Like Ray McLeod gets targets, Darnell Mooney, London, Pitts, Bijan. Like, it's not easy to stack Kirk Cousins and know what you're getting from his receivers because he will spread it around. You can say the same of Geno to a lesser extent with the three receivers they have there. So I'll be under on them. I think they're good plays. Like that game is really appealing and it really should shoot out in the Dome in Atlanta, but I'm just going elsewhere with Daniel Jones, Purdy, Richardson, guys like that. I also want to shout out Matthew Stafford real quick at 5'6". Just Cooper Kupp could play, and if he does, I think pairing those two together makes sense. We don't know if he's playing yet, but I think this was his original target date, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, good old Matthew Stafford banged up and all that. Yeah, I mean, good call. I mean, I don't want to ignore the Falcons Seahawks game at all. It's just Geno's chalky is probably the only reason that I'm not like super excited to play him. But yeah, they're both fine. All right, moving on to running back. Actually, let me check out the value real quick, just so we're not missing anybody. I think we kind of covered everybody there. That looks like a value. You highlighted Brock Purdy, who is top 10 in value. I mean, like you could, Joe Burrow against the Browns. I don't like that at all. What do you think?
No.
Yeah. All right. So that about does it for what we like at quarterback. Do with that what you will. Coming in with the top fantasy projection for running back is, can you guess?
Chuba Hubbard, maybe?
Kyren Williams. Okay, I love Kyren Williams today. I don't really think he needs a big sales pitch. He comes in with the best projection by 3 fantasy points. He is going to be very owned. Highest owned running back by far. Oh, no, that's not true. He's not the chalkiest running back. He's just one of the chalkiest running backs and the best projecting running back. But yeah, the Raiders are a very good matchup. Let's see. This thing, every time I use it, it does not load properly. But they are what? They're definitely bottom 10 against running backs on the year, and they're just like, they've given up. They traded away Devontae Adams, so they don't even care anymore. So he looks awesome at 8.1K. He's appropriately priced. Rounding out the top 5 is in terms of raw points projection. Behind him are Bijan Robinson, Hubbard, as you noted, Kenneth Walker III, and Saquon Barkley. So looking at that group of 5 backs, which ones do you like the most?
I love Kenneth Walker in this spot. Cheaper than Kyren by $800. That game looks fantastic. I think you get some leverage off of the passing pieces by playing him. Not that he's going to be unowned. I think he's going to be somewhat popular, but I said I'll be under on the passing stuff for Seattle. So I think playing Kenneth Walker makes a lot of sense as leverage. Chuba Hubbard, I'm getting to quite a bit. Like the matchup against Washington's fine. The offense at least is more capable now that they have Dalton in there. So Hubbard's been fantastic. You can argue he's still underpriced. I love Bijan on the other side of that Atlanta-Seattle game. No qualms with getting to him, even with Tyler Algier playing an annoyingly big role for whatever reason. Saquon's fine. Not really going to let the narrative of revenge drive me to him. I am pretty notably under on Kyren Williams, which feels pretty frightening, but there's a lot to like at running back, so I don't think you really have to play him into significant ownership. I think you can pivot away pretty safely with some other options.
Yeah, he's probably one guy where I'm not really giving a crap about ownership too much. Kyren is pretty close to a lock for me. I just think he's a smash play. Bijan Robinson looks like good chalk. He's coming in with 21% ownership. We'll talk about that in a second, but he's pretty cheap considering the week he just had. And the matchup he has, Seattle is bottom 12 against fantasy running backs. By the way, on the other side, Kenneth Walker facing a Falcons defense who have given up 1 rushing touchdown to running backs all year. That is ominous. So I don't know how interested I am in Kenneth Walker if he's going to be chalky. I think I would just pivot to Bijan. I mean, they're both chalky, so it's like, either one. They're in a high total game, so I mean, it's not bad to go with Kenneth Walker. I just think I'm going to be out. I will note Saquon Barkley, true revenge at 8.2K and no ownership. He is the mother of all pivots off of Kyren Williams. I think one thing you could do in GPPs a little bit, even though I really, really like Kyren, is you could pivot to Saquon there and then go fire up like Cooper Kupp or something and leverage the Kyren Williams ownership. I don't know yet. I didn't check Kupp's ownership. We'll check that in a second if that even matters. But that's one thing you could do. So that really rounds up the top 5 as far as fantasy projection. Let's look at ownership. Kyren, Hubbard, Pollard, Bijan, and Ken. So really the only new guy here to discuss would be Tony Pollard. He faces a Bills defense that is giving up the second most fantasy points to the running back position. So it looks pretty good. They also give up a ton of receiving production. I think this is the most receptions on the year to running backs. Yep. So this is a really good spot for Pollard, even if they fall behind, which they surely will. But I think he could have a lot of success here. The only downside with Pollard is he's going to be chalky, but at 6.3K, once again, I think he's a pretty good play.
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of him, which does scare me. I feel like they're just going to
Yeah,
get smashed in this game.
sure.
And I don't know if he'll catch enough passes to make up for it if they fall down 21-0 and have to completely abandon the run game. But he's cheap-ish, so you're getting that with him. Similar with Hubbard, like those two in that range just look fantastic. I think one high-end running back that I will be over on is Mixon. I mentioned loving that Green Bay Houston game. Mixon's been outstanding in the 2 full games he's played when healthy. Left that other game against Chicago like in the 3rd quarter or something like that. Gets all the work, touchdown equity to get down in the red zone. Doesn't look like he's going to be owned compared to these other high-end backs. He's over 7K, so I think people are just overlooking this game in general, and I don't really understand why. So I do love, even if you're playing Stroud, I think you can play Mixon with him because he will get the occasional catch.
Yeah, Joe Mixon just has that massive role. Awesome game. Can't deny that at all. The only problem with Mixon is he is a little bit pricey at 7.2K. Coming down a little bit on price and just kind of pointing out a couple other guys that look pretty interesting. The first of which would be Brian Robinson Jr., 6.4K. He looks like he'll be back after missing last week. He has an amazing matchup against the Carolina Panthers. They are, I think, dead last against fantasy running backs on the year. If not so, they're very, very close. Yep, they're dead last. So as long as he's going to be a full go, he looks really good at 6.4 in that Hubbard and Pollard range. I think I prefer him over Pollard, especially since Pollard is going to be owned. But I like all three of those guys. Like you said, I think you can definitely get away with just paying like kind of mid-range for these guys and then going and get some stud wide receivers if that's what you want to do. The other guy to note would be Alexander Madison. 17 fantasy points last week. Hey, the Rams are not good against fantasy running backs. Bottom 10 against fantasy running backs, 6 rushing touchdowns allowed to the position. And Madison has the role. Zamir White might be back, so I'd be a little bit less interested in him if that's the case. But at 5.5K, Madison is a pretty good value at running back. Let's see. The only other guy I want to note would be Achane, who is back. He's 6.7K against the Colts, who have been really bad against running backs, specifically just in rushing production allowed. They are 5th in yards given up to running backs on the ground. So Mostert is there. Achane, missed some time with a concussion. So those are things to consider. But I think he looks really, really good and is a high upside play at 6.7K. Most notably, I don't think he's garnering any ownership. Yeah, 4% owned Achane. That's very interesting to me. All right, who else stands out for you at running back before we move along?
I think in the same range, you can make a case for the Lions. David Montgomery, 6'6", Jahmyr Gibbs, 6'9", I think. They can both get there. The touchdowns are kind of unpredictable. It seems like Montgomery is generally the goal line guy, but Gibbs obviously has a big enough role to still get there, even at a more expensive salary. Love that game against the Vikings. I think the running backs, like no one's going to play those two guys. Like people want to stack this game up, and they're going to go overlooked. So I think
possibly for good reason. Minnesota is number 2 against fantasy running backs on the year.
I do not care at all. I think the Lions want to run the ball. They have the best offensive line in the league. They haven't played the Lions yet. I will play these guys if they're going to be completely unowned because of the matchup and because they split the work. But I think they're good plays in tournaments, just like Achane, I think is fine. Josh Jacobs, too. I'm just going to keep harping on this game, going overlooked. He's 6'4", always has upside. He's been productive this season when he's gotten the ball. They've been doing most of their damage through the air with Love in the lineup. So not the prettiest game logs for him, but I think at 6'4", he's another of these guys who could go overlooked with like Hubbard and Pollard being super popular in that range.
Yep. All right, I like it. All right, on to wide receiver we go.
What's up with Jordan Mason, by the way? Is he going to play?
Well, okay. So, yeah, if he's out, Isaac Arendo would be pretty darn appealing because he is very cheap. What's his price? Actually, like 6.6. He's not cheap at all. Okay.
They were ready.
If Mason's out, you can play Garendo, but the Chiefs rank like number 1 or something against fantasy running backs. Yeah, number 1. They're pretty darn good at stopping running backs. Obviously, it's the 49ers in their system, and they have talented and explosive backs. So, I don't know. I don't want to pay 7.6K in a brutal spot for Mason, who has a shoulder issue. Like one hit, he could be done. So I'm not doing that at all. That's a full fade for me. I will not play him at all. But if he's out at 6.6K, I think Garendo's speed puts him in play. Just not really a priority for me if he is, because as you said, there's so many good options in that same price range. Okay, so on to wide receiver. Justin Jefferson leads the way, best projection in slate, 22 fantasy points. Obviously, this game has a nice total, like you said. It's one we should be attacking. His ownership is not enough. I love Justin Jefferson. 8.5K is steep, but the Lions are past funnel defense. He is a high volume stud, and he's only coming in at 11% ownership. He looks amazing. Behind him, though, you get a lot of value with the other guys who are coming in with good projections. Jamar Chase, not necessarily, only $100 cheaper, and neither Amon-Ra St. Brown, but both those guys come in as the top three projecting wide receivers. And then behind them are Drake London and Cooper Kupp. 7.9K for Cooper Kupp coming back. That feels a bit steep, but Drake London, once again, at 6.9K looks like a really good value. All right, so if in that 5-pack, who stands out the most to you?
It's going to be Jefferson, just kind of by default. He looks great. Game looks great. No issue with that. I think Kupp is interesting. Like I said, if he plays, I can't imagine they would bring him back and then like limit him. Like if he's healthy enough,
I can imagine.
I would think he would play. Well, what's the point? Like why not just wait till he's healthy then?
I don't know.
I think he's okay.
I can imagine.
I don't think anyone's going to play him, even if he plays. Like no one's going to play that at 7-9. Matchup's good.
Yeah,
I think it's okay. The other high end guys I'm getting to more than Jefferson and pretty much everyone else. Stephon Diggs is overpriced. I think it's 7.7, but should be the number one guy. He and Tank Dell both look great to me. Tank Dell at 6.5 is one of my highest owned receivers on the slate. I'm just going to keep getting to that game, keep bringing it up. And
well,
then,
no Nico,
Malik
man.
Neighbors.
Fire up the Texans guys. No Nico.
Yeah, and I don't think they're going to be owned. And then Neighbors will play officially after missing 2 games with a concussion. His last 3 games, 64% target share, 34% target share, 38% target share. And they're playing the Eagles, who are not an imposing defense. Like, I see no reason not to play him a ton.
No, they're not just not imposing. They've given up the 7th most points to fantasy wide receivers. This is an amazing matchup.
I feel like they should be good. Like, they have all these Georgia players. They have all this talent, and they just are trash. So,
So here's the thing. This is another reason why I see zero reason to just mess with Kupp. So many reasons to not play Kupp, in my opinion. Obviously, the price is amazing, and the matchup is okay.
I don't think he's a great play. I just think if he's going to be unowned,
he's not owned,
him in like 5% and you'd be over the field. Yeah, like
right. And also, he's 7.9K when he should be at least like 8.5, where Jefferson's at. Like health aside, like he should be as expensive, if not more expensive, than every other wide receiver on the slate. But Malik Neighbors is $400 cheaper and only carrying 10% ownership. So for me, it's like right away, Jefferson and Neighbors. If these dudes aren't going to be owned, they're both in smash spots. They're expensive, but they look great. So I love Neighbors for sure. A couple other guys we should touch on just because they're probably too cheap. Deontay Johnson is 6.6K. His price is ticking up slowly, but the spot against the Commanders looks really, really good. Terry McLaurin on the other side of that game. Like you said, it remains to be seen if we really want to get a ton of exposure to a possible blowout. But on paper, the matchup looks good both ways. So Scary Terry looks good as well at 6.8K. I kind of like DK Metcalf. I feel like this could be an explosive week for him. 6.8K for him. He is a pretty good pivot away from Deontay and McLaurin because they're both carrying 16+% ownership, and he's only about 10 or 11. So yeah, as far as like the mid range, those guys all look pretty darn good. And you mentioned Tank Dell at 6.5K. His price is ticking up a little bit, but that still sounds just about right in a pretty good spot. Is there any other mid-range guys or like value guys at wide receiver that you feel like you really need to get to?
The mid-range, upper mid-range would be Deebo Samuel, who I think has been limited in practice, but I hope he plays. And
Ayuk season.
Fortunately, Brandon Ayuk at 6.3. I'm getting a lot of him as well.
Yeah, for sure.
He has one good game all season. Didn't do a damn thing last week, but especially if Deebo's out, he's going to probably become chalk. But if Deebo's in, I like them both quite a bit. I mentioned I'm playing Purdy a lot, so that makes sense. I don't hate AJ Brown, even as a one-off. If you're not playing with Jalen Hurts, that's a super expensive stack. AJ Brown is 8K, but similar argument to Cooper Kupp. I don't think he's going to get played by anyone on this slate. Similar case for Devontae Smith. It's kind of like the Houston stack. Like the pieces are expensive, but there's upside. There's a reason they're expensive, so I don't mind getting to them if they're going to be unowned. Did over Jaden Reed. He's also quite expensive at 7.2, but Love's not too pricey. Christian Watson's under 5K. I think that's pretty interesting as a kind of double stack there with Love. And then the Atlanta pieces, I don't mind. London, Darnell Mooney at 5.6 looks good. Ray McLeod at 4.4. I think is pretty interesting. I'll be playing these guys even if I'm not stacking them with Cousins.
Okay, so a couple of values that we should probably pay attention to. I'll note one that does not have an amazing matchup and does not feel safe, but the roll was, the roll was really good. He's only 4K, so I do have my sights on Juju a little bit. He might end up being owned though, so we could pivot to some Browns, perhaps, because Amari Cooper's gone. He's got traded out of town. Obviously, Deshaun Watson makes everything look gross in Cleveland, but they're probably going to be throwing, and the Bengals have been bad defensively all year. They are, I don't know where they rank against wide receivers, but they haven't been good. They give up a lot of points. So Jerry Jeudy at 4.8K looks totally fine. It is still Jerry Jeudy, and he has Deshaun throwing him the passes, but 4.8K for a guy who's going to step into a number one role, that's pretty damn cheap. I like that a lot. And Elijah Moore, 3.2K. He's my favorite wide receiver punt of the slate. Just by default, he's going to step up and play wide receiver 2 snaps for this team as they trail. So just by being alive and being out there, he could get it done at 3.2K. What do you need from a guy at 3.2K? 10 points? Elijah Moore can get me 10 points. I don't feel bad about that. All right.
I feel bad about that.
Well, I mean, I feel bad about it, but I also don't mind the risk and reward involved there.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from.
Okay.
Couple of values I don't hate. Noah Brown. Did you mention Noah Brown 4K flat in that Washington game? I think he's okay as a pivot from
I like
Juju.
that. It's a nice leverage play on Chalky Scary because I don't think he's going to be owned, is he?
I assume not, but who knows? That game might be somewhat popular, so he could be. I have Smith Schuster as my highest owned receiver right now, which is frightening, but he is 4K, played a ton. He was super involved in the last game without Rice, so I get it, and I like it. I can see why you'd want to fade him, though. Another value to consider would be Jacoby Myers if he plays. I think he sat out last week, but he's only 5.4. Obviously, Devontae is gone. They are semi-indoors at SoFi against the Rams. So, like you said, LA's defense hasn't been very good all season. I don't think playing Jacoby Myers, and especially Brock Bowers, is a bad path at all this week.
Okay, before we wrap up wide receiver, let me say one thing. Juju is actually iffy for this game. It sounds like he's going to play, but it also sounds like he's not 100%. Two things. Xavier Worthy is really explosive. It only takes one hit for Worthy to pay off, and he's not that expensive. But also another really nice punt that is very risky but could pay off if Juju is limited or ends up being out of this game. Justin Watson. Now, he hasn't done anything, but it has been a favorite target of Patrick Mahomes in the past, and he played 70% of snaps last week and 69% the week before that. So if there is a reality here this week where Juju is limited or out, Justin Watson at 3.7K, I think is a very viable punt. The thing is, I would only really want to play Justin Watson if people also don't think about this and hop on it and his ownership spikes. Like if Juju was out, then all of a sudden all that Juju ownership has to go somewhere. And naturally, Justin Watson would benefit and would be $300 cheaper. He'd be, an obvious pivot. So I only really want to do it if Juju is in, personally. Okay, so moving on to tight end here. Looking at projection, Travis Kelce leads the way with 14.7 fantasy points. And then rounding out the top 5 in terms of raw points projection, we got Brock Bowers, George Kittle, Sam Laporta, and Dalton Kincaid, who I believe is questionable with something. He's got some issue. Anyways, of that 5-pack, who stands out the most for you at tight end?
It is undoubtedly Brock Bowers. He's 5'8", so he's already expensive. But like we said, no Devontae. Last 2 weeks, he's had a 32% and a 25% target share. He's really been getting looks all season. I don't think the move from Minshew to O'Connell makes him any worse. It might make him better. In fact, matchup against the Rams looks great. I think he's easily the top tight end on the slate. For me, at least. Kelce, it's fine because he's playing at a horrible tight end position, but I think I prefer Kittle just because I want to play Purdy more than I want to play Mahomes. So naturally, I'm going to get to Kittle more in stacks. And that's really it at the high end. Bowers by a lot, and then Kittle, and then a gap to Kelsey for me.
Yeah, I don't disagree with a lot of that. I think I'm never going to tell you not to play Kelsey just because his role is back. Like he's been crushing it last 2 weeks. Eventually he's going to score touchdowns too because he may be old, but he's still good to some degree. But I'm with you. Brock Bowers is the number one tight end play for me. The Rams are second worst against tight ends on the year, and obviously no Devontae. Officially, Bowers is getting like 9+ targets in every game. He's an explosive guy. Eventually he's going to start scoring touchdowns as well. So love him at 5.8K. He is my number one tight end option as well. If you don't want to pay up and you want to go down a little bit, Sam Laporta. He did finally score a touchdown last week. He only had one target and made it for 52 yards into a touchdown. Eventually, though, he's going to get going. And by the way, the Vikings, their weakness, it's against tight ends. Bottom 10 defense against fantasy tight ends on the year. So Sam Laporta at 5.3K really calls to me. By the way, I really hope Dalton Kincaid suits up because 10% ownership for Dalton Kincaid, that can't be real. So if Kincaid is in and people want to go flock to Kincaid and David Njoku, please do. I'm going to go get seemingly unowned Kelsey, Bowers, and Laporta. That's my strategy this week. I do not see a tight end punt that I really feel good about. There are guys we can look at like Colby Parkinson at 3.8K, but if Kupp is back, that seems not fun. You could get exposure to the Texans game with Dalton Schultz because Nico's still out. But yeah, I don't know. Are there any punts at tight end that you like?
I actually kind of like Njoku because he's 4-1. He's not a full punt at 4-1, but 30% targets last week. They lost Cooper, who's been over 20% targets every week. You mentioned liking Elijah Moore and Jerry Jeudy a little bit. I think Njoku is going to be somewhat popular because tight end is wasteland, but I think it's okay. The matchup against the Bengals is fine, and he's cheap enough. I don't hate Zach Ertz either. I could see him being somewhat popular as part of that commander stack, but even as a one-off, Ertz is fine. Parkinson, Schultz, that's really it. I guess Tucker Kraft, a little more expensive, also carrying a Q tag, but if he's in, a couple weeks ago, we saw what kind of upside he has, and I mentioned really liking this Green Bay-Houston game in general.
Yeah, I agree. Njoku at 4.1 is a really good play in a vacuum. The only reason why I wouldn't really have a ton of interest in him is ownership only. Obviously, Amari's gone. The Bengals are bottom 10 against tight ends, and he's really cheap. So I'm okay with Njoku for sure. If that's like one of the 3 or 4 spots you eat chalk at, fine. But just like at some point, we got to make different plays here so we're not just getting like the chalkiest lineup in the world. Who's the other guy? Oh, yeah, Kyle Pitts at 4.5K. That could be a nice pivot off of Njoku too. A little bit less owned than Njoku. Their projection is comparable, and he's facing a Seahawks defense that is bottom 5 against tight ends. So I think all of that looks pretty good. Tight end is just usually a wasteland, though. So personally, I'm probably going Kelsey, Bowers, and Laporta this week for the most part. All right, real quick, let's look at defense. What defense do you want to play this week? I don't want to go into it too much. It's defense.
Yeah, I don't mind the Rams 3K flat against the Raiders. Raiders have really shown nothing offensively all year. Now they have no Devontae, as they haven't for weeks now. Cleveland is 2,500. Like, I know that they're facing the Bengals, obviously a high upside offense. Whoa. But they're cheap. They are a talented defense. They can get sacks. We saw them score a touchdown last week. I think they're a fine punt. Ditto for the Giants against the Eagles, the Titans maybe against the Bills, just like kind of hovering in the cheap range for the most part.
Yeah, I think it's just going to be like what the system poops out, like what the system gives me a defense. I'll probably just roll with that. Or if I'm building like a single entry lineup, it's just going to be a punt defense. I'll roll with that. That said, how do we not want to play the Bills against Will Levis? Like, I mean, it's tough because they're 3.5K, and I definitely want to spend my funds on other things besides defense, but that will be very hard to ignore. Alrighty, that is going to do it for us. Hopefully this helps you out in some way. At least it gives you an idea as to where ownership is going, how guys are projecting, and that kind of stuff. You can also get some betting insight at the end of this video for our Week 7 NFL betting video. If we helped you out in any way, give this video a like. That helps us out a lot. And then you can also subscribe to the channel so you can get alerted to future videos just like this. All right, thanks for watching and good luck.